Welcome everybody. Appreciate you all being here. I want to introduce, we're actually very honored to have with the State Liquor Authority, the chairman of the State Liquor Authority, Vince Bradley, the Deputy Commissioner of Licensing, Tom Donahue, and the Executive Deputy Commissioner, Sharif Kabir, here with the SLA. Before I hand it over to them, I want to kind of bring Bert back to this, which I'm very honored. Better call Paul. I will tell you that the only way when you called me and I had the answers, it was because Sharif Kabir would pick up the phone when I called. It was because the chairman would answer my emails and Tom would answer the emails. That's how I got the information out to you, was because of them. So I really wanted to give them big props, how helpful they are, not only to the industry, but how helpful they were to the New York State Brewers Association, helping us navigate this horrible situation and all the rule changes and the press conferences that would happen. And I would say, what does this mean? And you go, I don't know, we're hearing it for the first time too. We'll get back to you. And you did, always. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here today and everything that you did for us and the Brewers to get here today. Thank you very much. So with that, I'll hand it off to you.
So I just want to, one, you've all dealt with Paul before, so it's obviously not a chore to get back to him, because some of the people we deal with are certainly not as affable as Paul is. So it's always good to talk to him on the phone. I don't think any industry in the last 2 years has been hit in this country as hard as the hospitality industry, and within that industry, I don't think anybody has been hit as hard as the craft manufacturers during that pandemic. And I do want to give you all kudos, because even though everybody was struggling just to do anything to survive, the least amount of enforcement infractions we received during that period of time, the year I should say that we were doing heavy enforcement because of the pandemic, was amongst your group. So I want to applaud you all for the compliance that you all showed and trying as best you can to do the right thing. I know it was very, very difficult, and I want to stress how difficult it was, not just for you, but as Paul mentioned, for us as well. We, when everything got shut down, there was no plan beforehand. No one warned me that that was going to happen. I literally, on the day everything got shut down, got a call from the former governor at 8:30 in the morning on my way up here. I live about an hour south of here, basically telling me he was shutting everything down because of the pandemic, and that we needed to figure out a way to allow alcohol to go, which had never been contemplated in our agency before. We had no idea where to even start. And so I want to give Sharif and Tom both a great deal of applause, basically, because Sharif came up with regulations literally within 3 hours. We were on the fly for basically 6 months trying to figure out what we were required to do under the governor's executive law, and I know how confusing it was to you because it changed almost on a weekly basis. So it really was an unprecedented event, and you should all be congratulated for getting through it, because I think you are on the backside of it now. During the pandemic, we did take steps, as Paul pointed out, to try to make life easier for you. We didn't do everything to try to make life harder. One of the things was to temporarily waive renewal fees for manufacturers, in addition to deferring all civil penalties during the period of time of the pandemic. Another thing we did was expand the process for expanding your outdoor, not expand, we streamlined the process for expanding your outdoor spaces. We did, once again, I have to congratulate them. That was a half-hour meeting. What's the easiest way to let them do this so that they can do it almost immediately? After the half-hour meeting, we wrote it up and we sent it over and it was announced, and I think that was a big benefit. You know, as I said, your businesses were affected the most because your businesses are basically about people gathering. And that was the one thing that obviously could not occur for a large majority of this time. We also issued guidance allowing manufacturers to sell wine and cocktails to go, which I hope was a lifeline to you. And obviously it was very popular because it's currently in the governor's budget. In spite of all of that, I do have some interesting numbers. Since the start of 2020, which was basically during the pandemic, the number of craft breweries in New York State has risen by 12%, amazingly to me, that someone actually made the commitment and then went through with it during that period of time. And the number of farm breweries grew by 28%, microbreweries by 18.5%, and the farm branch offices or branch stores increased by 15%. So at this time, based on the numbers we have, we now rank second in the United States for the number of craft breweries. And we obviously remain a leader in that industry, not just in the number, but also in the innovations. Paul was actually describing to us the beer that won the award last year, which was a heavy maple beer, which I don't think I've ever heard of before, and I'm sure no one else is doing it anywhere else, which is great to hear. Governor Hochul has continued to be a tremendous advocate for the craft industry, and she's laser focused on continuing to support the growth of the craft beverage industry. I was at a event with her last week, and that was one of the things we did discuss. It was down in New York City, where she was announcing some legislation that she signed and some other topics that I'll get into in a minute. But on December 21st, the governor signed legislation that we have been pressing for, and I know you all have been pressing for years, which was the bill to create a temporary permit for craft manufacturers so that they can start brewing beer and making sales and bringing revenues in while their license is pending. We, of all people, recognize how long it takes to get a license. We're not happy about it. It takes about 26 weeks at this point. Our agency has been understaffed. I've been there 7 years, and it was understaffed before I got there. And even though we every year tried to get more resources, the resources just weren't available. I will tell you that Governor Hochul, almost immediately upon becoming governor, had us meet with her senior staff. We did a presentation to them telling them what we needed to shore up our licensing to bring down our times, and she immediately gave us $2 million, which is almost a 15% increase in our budget, 20% increase in our budget, which our budget has not been increased in the 7 years I've been here. Almost all of that $2 million will be dedicated to licensing staff for Tom here, who's the Deputy Commissioner of Licensing. It will double our licensing staff so that they can renew applications quicker, and hopefully we should be able to get that number significantly lower than 26 weeks, at least within the coming year. The governor's budget also continues funding for a overhaul of our computer system. Right now, for those of you who have, well, I know you all applied for a license, but even now, the ones who are doing it now, it's still, our system is antique. It's back from the late 80s, early 90s. The license application has to be printed out. You have to send it in and go, and our review process we have to scan everything into our system. Once we get the hard copy, it's just a nightmare compared to what the technology allows you to do now. Our new computer system will allow everything to be done online, direct. We get your application, once you finish it, it's immediately in our database, and our licensing people will be able to review that application on their screens and all the records that you will upload. It should significantly reduce our times, make our reviews much more efficient, and that hopefully will be active by the end of the summer. It's been about a 2.5 or 3 year process at this point. They're in the midst of it right now. We hope to be live on that in August, correct, Sharif? November. There have been some delays, and so I apologize. Well, as I said, last week I went to a press conference in Brooklyn where the governor highlighted the things I just mentioned at the press conference and showed how focused she is on this, not just the craft industry, but also in getting all the businesses within the hospitality industry back to where they were prior to the pandemic, if not better. One of the things she did announce, which she directed our agency to do, was do a complete review of the ABC law. Anyone who's ever tried to read the law that governs you and the law that we actually are in charge of enforcing recognizes, I'm sure, that it basically looks like Greek. I'm a lawyer and have been for 25 years, and I don't understand a lot of it. Tom here understands most of it, and I can't explain why, but he does. But he's really the only one. So the reason that it is like that is because that law, most of it was drafted in 1933, and a lot of it has not changed significantly since then. None of the law comprehends the way you run your businesses now. None of it comprehends what you may want to do in the future. So when you call Paul, who then calls us and says, can I do this? Am I allowed to do this? And we have to tell him no. It's not because we don't want you to do it. It's because the law, the way it's written, doesn't allow you to do it. So what we're doing, not just for you folks, but for the entire hospitality industry, is trying to upgrade the law to make it, bring it to today's standards and to bring it hopefully to the way people are doing business today. We are going to reach out to stakeholders. Paul will be obviously one of them who we'll meet with to find out what changes they would suggest. And we're going to be doing that over the next 5 or 6 months, meeting with stakeholders in the industry, whether it be restaurant associations, liquor store associations, brewer associations, all the craft industries, as well as wholesalers and other bigger manufacturers, to find out what ideas they may have. So if you do have ideas, I urge you to bring them to Paul, because we will be sitting down with him in the near future to find out what they would like to, what you guys would like to see change in the law. And it could be the simplest thing, because there are some strange laws in there. I'll give an example of one, that a liquor store has to be at ground level so that you can see in it. And that, I can't tell you how many times that comes up, where we have a building where there's 7 or 8 steps up to the building where you technically, legally cannot have a liquor store there, which makes no sense today, but back in 1933, it was so the police could actually see in to make sure that they didn't turn the liquor store into a bar. But that's just some of the things that we have to deal with in this law, so we're going to try to straighten that out at the governor's direction. One thing the governor also highlighted at the event was one of the things that we as an agency were able to do over the last year was to allow liquor to be sold in movie theaters. I think that's going to be a very positive thing for the brewers, because most of the movie theaters that we've spoken to, they're only interested in carrying craft products. And what previously movie theaters could get licenses, but they could only get licenses if they could establish themselves as a restaurant, which means they had to have a full kitchen, serve a dinner, and then they could get a liquor license. We've now, I want to say, interpreted the law a little differently, and now they're able to get what's called a tavern wine license, where they're going to be able to serve beer and wine. And as I mentioned, most of them, at least in the upstate area where I'm from, have indicated that they're interested in serving your products. So it's just another outlet for you to be able to sell your products. As I said, it's important that we hear from the industry, particularly on, and we do hear from Paul regularly, as he pointed out. But particularly now as we're going forward to try to change the law. So once again, in closing, I do want to just urge you to, if you have ideas, no matter what you think of those ideas, please send them to Paul, and he can bring them to us, or you can send them to us directly. I'm going to turn it over to Tom now, who's going to go through some of the legislative changes that have occurred in the last 2 years that you may not or may be aware of. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to take them after Tom's done. So thank you.
So I do know the ABC law, but I've got a printer from my home 6 months ago. I still can't figure out how to connect it to the Wi-Fi. So you may have, Josh, you may have to help me with that. Just want to follow up on comments the chairman made about our licensing bureau. So I came over to the licensing bureau unofficially in November, and I took over officially in beginning of January. So we had, if we're fully staffed, we have like 59 people. 20 of those or so are licensing examiners, the ones who are actually working on the applications. You know, with the governor's approval and with the work that the chairman and Sharif and Kim Chacon with the authority did, we're getting 30 new spots, and 20 of those are going to be actually licensing examiners. So we're doubling the people who are actually working on the applications. Since I came over there, we're also kind of doing a top-to-bottom review of our own processes. You know, there are things we've been doing, because when I asked, you know, I'm told, well, we've always done it that way. So we're trying to improve, you know, those processes. So we haven't done this really since 2019, right? Because 20 was canceled. 21 we did by WebEx or Zoom or something. So I'm going to go back with my legislative updates and the other material, kind of going back to 2019 and catching up from there. All right. So what I first want to do is talk about legislation. So as the chairman mentioned, the temporary manufacturing permit. Up until March 21st, the only manufacturers that can get a temporary manufacturing permit are wineries and farm wineries. And they can even get one if there's no application pending. That's all going to change come the 21st. So the new permit is going to allow any manufacturer to get a temporary permit, all right? When you file your actual license application, and you will have to file the application to get the permit, you can get the temporary operating permit. All right, all you need is the application, and for liquor and wine, the TTB permit. For you guys, your brewer's notice. That's all you need. All right, and that will get you started. We will have a process set up, much like with our temporary permits for retailers, to fast track those. All right. So normally it takes a little while for an application to come in, to get assigned, to get reviewed. The temporary permits will be reviewed much faster to get them out the door to you. And we will try to leave some time at the end, as the chairman said, to answer some questions. So if I go through things a little quickly, I apologize. Credit card payments. This came around just around the time of our last meeting in 2019, I believe, to allow beer wholesalers and you, if you sell directly to retailers, to get paid by their business credit card. So the first version that came out had a provision that you would have to add to the invoice an amount that was essentially determined by the authority. And that was shortly changed, I think within a matter of a month or two, to set it at a 3% fee, which is the next part here, all right? So you can, if you are selling directly to retailers, all right, either have them pay by cash, by a business check, by electronic funds transfer, and now by credit card. But you have to add the 3% to the bill, all right? So this had to change, because of the changes in the law, it changed two things. First, it changed what you can accept as a payment, and it also changed your 180-day law. Now, I'm hoping that all of you who deal with retailers know what the 180-day law is, all right? For those of you who don't, it's a law that was put into place in the late 70s, and if you, dealing with a retailer, whether it's as a brewer or a wholesaler, you reduce your price to the retailer, you've got to hold that price for 180 days. Right? You can only raise it under the old law if there was a tax increase. Now the other part of this is you can also add the 3% to it. And just for kind of a background, that was actually put in place, that 180-day law, back in the late 70s, when the big brewers were coming into the state. My grandfather had a small grocery store down in the Bronx, and he carried Schaefer and Ballantine and Pabst. I don't think I used to help him, stock the cooler. I don't remember seeing Budweiser or any national brand in that cooler. It was all local beers, all right? And this provision was kept in, or put into the law, to stop a big brewer to come in, slash their prices as low as possible to get retailers to buy their product. So the law was put in there to say, okay, you can do that, but you're going to keep that price for 180 days. Okay, the restaurant brewer license. I'm guessing most of you, or maybe none of you, have a restaurant brewery license. Some of you may not know what it is. It's actually a retail license that allows for the brew pub. All right, so this is a retailer who's brewing a small amount of beer. Over the last 10 years, the privileges of this license have expanded to let them do more of the things that you do as a brewer. All right, so in 2019, and this was passed after our 2019 conference, it allowed for these these restaurant brewers, they only used to be able to sell beer to other restaurants where there was common ownership. So if I had a restaurant brewery license and I held maybe 2 or 3 other restaurant licenses, I could brew my beer at my restaurant brewery and then sell it to my other places. 2019, the law was changed to allow me to sell up to 2,000 barrels of beer to unaffiliated restaurants, unaffiliated retailers. In 2020, it was changed again to allow those licensees to sell, and all those sales up top had to go to 2,000 barrels, had to go through a wholesaler. It was changed again to allow 250 barrels of that 2,000 to be sold directly by the restaurant brewer, bypassing the wholesaler, much like you guys can do. You don't have to, if you don't want to, go through a wholesaler. All right, so that's pretty much, because of the pandemic, the only major legislation that impacts you as brewers. There's been some things, how many people here have like an on-premises license with their brewery? Okay, so there's been some changes there. One of the things, we made the change to the temporary manufacturing license. There was also a change to the temporary permit for retailers to make it easier for the retailers to get temporary permits. And there've been some other changes, but for the most part, there hasn't been too much because it was the pandemic. So on the advisory front, now the advisories are the things that the guidance that the members issue, the chairman, Commissioner Ford, Commissioner Fan, at the full board meetings. All right. So if something is not in the law or it's not in our rules, there may be what we call an advisory on it, where you can go there and get some guidance on a particular topic. Those advisories are all on our website. I think if you go down to, on the bottom of the website, there's a link to what's called guidance documents. And there you'll find the advisories, you'll find declaratory rulings, which are when somebody has a specific question about a situation, they can ask the members whether or not it's legal or not. There aren't too many declaratory rulings that really pertain to manufacturers, except for some tied house issues and gifts and services, which I'll kind of touch on at the end. So one of the advisories that came out, and it's really directed mostly at liquor and wine wholesalers who have to price post for their retail prices, but they were charging late fees for those retailers who are on COD. Now, for liquor and wine, it's kind of easy to figure out when somebody is late because they have 30 days to pay. For beer, as most of you know, there are these 2-week cycles. All right, I don't even try to figure it out. I know we have a calendar on our website that makes it easier to figure out when a payment is due. All right, so I don't even try to explain it to brewers because you guys probably understand it better than I do. But anyway, so, or maybe you don't. So if you're charging late fees for somebody who was on COD, so you let them buy on credit, their time has now come by and they still haven't paid, so you're going to report them as being on COD. If you're going to charge late payments after that, you should take a look at that advisory. It gives you guidance about whether or not you can do it and how you should do it. What it essentially comes down to is you can't pick and choose which retailers you give a break to. If you're going to charge late fees to a retailer, you should be charging it to all of them. And if you're going to waive late fees, you just can't pick and choose who gets their fee waived. Another one is contracts with third parties. This is primarily for retailers who are entering into arrangements with maybe the company that's going to manage the restaurant, or all these delivery companies that are out there getting your percentage of their profits. All right, but if you have some agreement with another company that's not on your license, all right, and they're getting a share of your profits, you better read this because it applies to everybody. All right, the general rule is that as a licensee, you can't allow an unlicensed person to share in your profits or have control over your business. So if you have some arrangement with somebody who's not licensed, you should take a look at this. All right, some recent developments, like I said, the increase in licensing staff, kind of already talked about that, the chairman did as well. The hope is that once we're fully staffed, and we're probably about 70% of the way, 75% of the way of getting those new positions filled. It will take some time to get everybody trained, but we're hoping by the end of the spring, early summer, we'll start addressing the backlog of applications we have and get things moving. And as I said, there are some things we made a change to the processing. How many of you have branch offices? Okay, so some of you may have filled the application in and seen a longer than anticipated delay. Your eyebrows went up, so I'm guessing you did, or? Okay, so the original intent was to have those things fast-tracked. It was going to be a one-page application. We get it in, we process it, we review it, and get it out the door. For a variety of reasons, it slowed down, all right? So mostly at Sharif's, I'll say urging. That's a nice way to put it. Here, Kaisen, find a way to get this done faster, all right? So that's what we've done, all right, to get those permits moved, reviewed and approved faster than what we've been doing. All right, and we're going to do the same thing with the temporary manufacturing permits, to get those permits out the door faster to you if you're opening up a new location. Now, it's only for the manufacturing license, okay? It's not for, so you can't get a temporary operating permit for the branch office, but the goal is that those branch office permits will be processed just as quickly as the temporary operating permit would be. So you'll be opening up the doors faster, all right? Other than that, I really don't have, oh, maybe I do. Nope. Oh, the compliance now. So that's the updates on what's happened with legislation and advisories. I'm going to start going through some compliance issues. For those of you who have, sat through this before with me, I'm just going to talk about the same issues I always have been, all right, because I just want to kind of pound them in because they're important. Contract brewing, okay, that's when you're brewing for somebody else or they're brewing for you, all right? It has to be two licensed companies doing this. You can't be doing contract brewing for somebody else, somebody who comes up with a nice name like Better Call Paul, right, for a beer, and comes to you and says, I want you to brew this beer for me. All right? The two parties both have to be licensed. All right? Terms of sale and the COD. I mentioned the changes to be to use credit card payments. It always seems that when I do some presentation, somebody, either during the session or afterwards, kind of asks me about the COD list, because they've never heard of it. All right? If you're dealing with the retailer, you should know what the COD list is. As I said, you have that, if you're extending credit to a retailer, rather than making them pay on delivery, if they're late, when the deadline comes, the payment deadline comes and they haven't paid, they have to be reported on the COD list. All right? You all should have, if you all deal with, anybody who deals with a retailer should have an account to access the COD system to report those retailers. You also have an obligation, if you're selling to a retailer, all right, if you're going to extend credit to them, to make sure they're not on the COD list. All right, you cannot extend credit to a retailer who's on the COD list. And the retailer will get in trouble, you'll get in trouble. And also, it's just bad business when you think about it. If there's a retailer who's not paying his bills to another wholesaler or brewer, why are you giving them credit? Other businesses, we've talked about this for years, the food trucks, all right? You can't have food trucks or other businesses on your licensed premises because it's your premises, all right? Now, we've come up with ways to help licensees to address that. Maybe the food truck is going to park in your parking lot, and as long as your parking lot isn't part of your licensed premises, that's fine. Your patron, if you have Friday night events at your at your brewery where people come and maybe have a band or something, that's fine. You are serving food because you have to serve food if you're serving for on-premises consumption. But maybe you're going to have a vendor or two come there. Just keep them off your licensed premises. Let your patrons go out, buy the food, and then come back in. The franchise agreements, I just mentioned this always, just as a reminder to you that if you're dealing with a wholesaler, you have to have a franchise agreement. Right? It's not something we enforce as far as checking the agreement, but there has to be a contractual arrangement between you and your wholesalers. The books and records, just for those of you who are farm brewers, just keep in mind that if we get a complaint about whether or not you're complying with the New York State labeled beer requirements, that's what we're going to look at to see if you're in compliance. We're not going out, doing spot checks, but if there's a complaint, we're going to check and we're going to look at your books and records to see if you're buying enough New York State hops and other New York State ingredients that matches up with how much beer you're sending out. And then one of the last things, sale to unlicensed businesses. This tends to be a bigger issue with small bodegas, grocery stores, convenience stores, those kind of things. So you may not deal with those directly, all right? But make sure if you're selling to a retailer that they have an actual license. And for example, if you get a check, make sure the check is in the name of the business that you're selling to and not another business, because that's a good sign that somebody else is running the business. And very quickly, gifts and services and tied house laws. Just keep in mind that there is a wall between you as a brewer and the retailers. There shouldn't be any relationships between, other than the sales relationship between you and the retailers. You shouldn't be giving them things, right? Whether it's cash or any other benefit, right? Because that's a potential violation. They'll get both you and the retailer in trouble and facing disciplinary charges. As I said, that's all I had. Just a quick update from a couple years ago, because I want to open up to any questions anybody might have. Yes, sir.
Do you have any information or point me to any information on the legality of vending machines selling beer? I heard under 50% out of vending machines.
Are you talking about a standalone vending machine like out in the hallway here or something?
Yeah, I know.
No, I actually I got an email about that last week. You can't do that. Okay, I don't care how, okay? It sounds like a really good idea, like right now, okay? Yeah, as I leave here, but no, okay? Any place that is selling alcoholic beverages has to have a license, or it's a temporary thing, a permit, all right?
The key thing is how do you make sure they're adults?
Well, yeah, there's a supervision issue. I mean, you can have, vending machines are allowed, say like in a hotel mini bar, you can have a vending machine type setup. I don't think it's ever come before the members, but maybe a restaurant or might have some kind of vending machine operation inside its licensed premises, but you can't have a standalone vending machine selling beer.
But you can utilize one in your licensed premises.
The members have never talked about that, okay? The problem is that that's probably going to be considered a separate bar, and you have to go to pay for it separately. There are some declaratory rulings that address kind of remote beer taps, when beer lines are run maybe underneath the floor and there's a beer tap on every table, or there's some kind of portable tap device that's brought out. There's some declaratory rulings on that. The members have never addressed whether or not a vending machine, okay, in an on-premise establishment. I believe there is a declaratory ruling about a wine store having some type of vending operation where you can select the bottles through that, but I don't think the members have addressed it otherwise.
And I think to summarize his answer is basically you should ask for a declaratory
Yeah.
ruling. Which basically lay out the whole scenario of how you want to operate through this vending machine and bring it to the board.
Can we just ask for forgiveness?
Yes, sir?
Would that be different than just a standalone cooler for my bottled product in my tasting?
If it's on your licensed premises and you just have a cooler there, and other people going there and just taking the bottle out and going up and paying for it then, that's a grocery store does that, that's fine. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I saw a slide earlier that said a restaurant brewery can only distribute up to 250 barrels to retailers?
No, so they can do 2,000 barrels total. That has to go through a wholesaler. They can do 250 without it going through a wholesaler.
If you're a self-distributing brewery,
No, this isn't for, this is for a restaurant brewer. So a restaurant brewer is a type of retailer, all right? So you have to have a restaurant, but you're allowed to have a small brewing operation. So we typically call these places the brew pubs, all right? It's a retailer who's allowed a limited amount, just like you're allowed as a manufacturer, you have retail privileges. This is a retailer with manufacturing privileges. They can brew as much beer as they want to to sell there. But if they want to sell it anyplace else, it's limited to the 2,000 barrels to go through a wholesaler, and 250 that doesn't have to go through a wholesaler.
so that's just restaurant brewery.
Right. That doesn't impact you at all. Your only limitations, if you're a microbrewer or a farm brewer, or you have to make 50 barrels a year, and you can't go above 250,000 a year. Yes, sir.
Well, real quick, this was a really crazy 2 years, and you probably don't hear this enough, but thanks for being flexible and helping us through that. And we do appreciate that. It means a lot, right? We are in this together. And when I wrote my business plan, we were 40th in breweries per state, and I was second. I think that's because the state has done amazing things. We have a great association. So we are ramping up, and your office hasn't changed, and that's hard. My only question is, what's the guidance on the 501c as a manufacturer?
To what extent? I mean, any corporation can get a license.
Well, because we tried to apply for it, but we heard that there was a new person coming in, and we're waiting on guidance.
That would be me. And I just moved down the hall.
If I made the wrong choice, we can change that.
This morning, I thought he made the wrong choice.
He's asking about the
But
sales.
real quick,
Are you talking about
our association.
wait, are you talking about the C wholesalers or the 501 not-for-profit?
No, the C wholesaler.
Oh, okay.
So our association does these regional meetings, they come to us, they update us on law changes and things, and they inform us that, hey, as a manufacturer, you can get this wholesaler's license.
Yeah,
I
so,
think that you guys understand that we're creative, we're innovative, and we're scrappy. We're gonna interpret any law,
you don't have to interpret it, because it's always been in the law, but apparently nobody else noticed.
but then why can't we get it?
You're gonna get it. It's gonna be available, okay? So let me just for background. Up until 1960 or so, when a beer...
Just so everyone knows, a C wholesaler is basically a beer store. If you're not aware of it, it's the beer stores you see that used to be all over the place.
So, up until 1960, when you got a beer wholesale license, it included the right to sell to consumers, right? In 1960, the law was changed to stop that. So, after that, the only beer wholesaler who can sell to consumers is somebody who can trace their business back to somebody who had a C license. So you buy the business, the license gets transferred to you. So there's only 400 maybe, ballpark, and only like maybe 250 of those are even active. And as the chairman said, most of them are now beer beverage centers. Some of the older, well-established wholesalers in New York State have the C license, even though they don't sell to consumers. I know, off the top of my head, Di Crescente has a C license, but they don't sell to consumers. All right. So when those laws were changed back in 1960, there was a provision put in the brewer law that said that a brewer can have a wholesale license, either at your location or someplace else. And it says right there, that wholesale license, even if it wasn't issued before 1960, has the retail privilege. All right. I was a little surprised when someone brought this to my attention a few months ago. Like, I said, yeah, you didn't know that? It's been in there, okay? No one's ever applied for the license. It's been there. So we're now getting inquiries about the license, all right? We actually have to create in our IT system a new license code for that. So once we get that done, then we can have an application available.
Are we going to get that done?
Yes.
Thank you. You don't need to get a new person.
On behalf of my son's college tuition and my daughter's wedding bill that I'm still paying off, I appreciate that. Yes, sir.
More taxes. We're in the same boat.
We don't see any of them, so.
Tom, thank you for this. This is very informative. We have a farm brewing license, and very much in favor of the ingredient minimums. But the ingredient minimums are going up to 90%, supposedly in 2024. Is that still on track? Is there any discussion as to whether or not that's going to be modified at all?
So we actually have legislation, we're going to talk about it tomorrow in the members meeting, that we put forth to make it 60% aggregate, freeze it there, and then also get rid of the 90%, so it'll stay at 60% in aggregate. So that's legislation that we have in this year, and hopefully we'll get it done this year, and we have next year if we don't get it done this year.
And just, we're not that involved in the percentages. That's more of an ag and markets issue, which I'm sure is who you're talking to about it. But, so we're not really privy to those conversations. I'm not, at least, are you?
Let me go back over there and I'll work back again.
Is there any leeway to the temporary beer, wine, and cider permit? It's 15 days that you have to submit it. I feel like this year, at least for my particular brewery, a lot of things are popping up because people are now kind of wanting to do more things. Do you see that being, as long as you submit the application, potentially down the road, that it could be temporarily approved, like the retailer?
We asked that they be submitted with 15 days in advance so that we can make sure we can get to them and get them reviewed. All right. The problem is that the longer you wait, there's a chance we may not get to it. All right. And then if there's a problem, all right, and we have some, there's a deficiency in the application, you may run out of time. So, I mean, does the system accept?
No.
No, they don't. So you, right, the system
So
is
just to clarify, that 15 days is really, because of the number we get and the staffing issue, it's really a personnel issue on our end. We can certainly examine whether, once we get the increase that I talked about, whether we can shorten that, but I don't know it'll ever be shortened to the day of the meeting. It's certainly, I don't know that it would ever go down below 10 days.
I mean, I essentially have 3 people working on those temporary permits, and that's temporary beer and wine permits, catering permits, people applying for miscellaneous permits. So I said, the longer you wait, then you're really putting yourself in a situation where you may not get the permit.
We try to work with people as best we can. If something does pop up, as he said, get it in as soon as you can, and then you always have the opportunity to see if you can work with it.
No, and that's happened. I've had a couple of events that were like 8 days away, and somebody backed out. They needed somebody else to come in, and I was given the permit in that time frame. I just was wondering if there was.
But it's not recommended, let's put it that way.
Definitely not. No. Every email I got back was like, please don't do this again.
Well, because they all end up on my desk or his desk.
It was, there are great business opportunities and for other breweries, and it's to lose out on a day at a big event.
No, and you're really, you folks are not the concern on those issues. Really, the concern happens down in New York City, who are also getting event, and sometimes the events are not necessarily what they tell us they are. And they end up being much bigger and problematic, and then somebody's looking for us, wondering why we gave it out. That's why we do have to do some level of due diligence on all of them.
Well, I mean, not only that, just to put it in context, if Tom says he has 3 examiners working on these, we see 20 to 25,000 applications per year for those 3 examiners. So, I mean, it's really a function of volume for us. It isn't, trying to be prescriptive in any way. It's really, what can we get through in a reasonable amount of time to deal with, as Tom says, efficiency, to do our due diligence and still be able to get through those. So we will always do whatever we can to try to be helpful, but at some point in time, we can't always do this, I guess, is the answer.
It also means that, if we have to, somebody has to work on one that was filed a day or 2 before, it means that person can't work on an application that was filed in time, and that person is waiting to hear back. So it's really not fair to them either. All right, let me go back here. I'm trying to go back and forth here a little bit, so.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I had some back and forth emails from probably 4 years ago now inquiring about the branch office allowances, and I don't know whether there's been more clarity or not. Like, can you apply for a branch office in an outdoor area with porta potties and that's essentially compliant? How creative can we get as we're sort of trying to grow our business and thinking about using the branch office?
Do you have, is it a place, or is it just an outdoor area?
So it would be a defined place. I'm wondering, like, as far as the movie theater thing goes, for example, too, can you run a bar inside somebody else's establishment?
Well, you definitely cannot have a branch office inside of another business. All right. The only thing we did in an advisory that was issued after one of the wine and grape conferences that were held like every couple of years, was we allow for multiple branch offices to be located together and share space, but the law says that otherwise a branch office can't have any access to another business at all. All right.
So your manufacturer.
No, any other business, period. Doesn't even have to be a licensed business. You can't put a branch office in a stationery store or anything like that. No other business at all. It has to be a standalone operation.
But you can if you're collaborating with other farm manufacturers.
With branch offices.
Right.
We allow other branch offices to be put together. That's it. So something where it's more of an outdoor venue, to me, raises issues about what else you're accessing. And it also raises issues about where you're keeping your product, how you're going to supervise things. So there are some other issues we would have to look at. Let me go in the back, and then we'll kind of move up a little bit. Yes, sir.
Does the law you talked about where you can't have other businesses on your licensed premises apply when you file for a temporary permit to pour somewhere? Like,
Yes.
Let's say at fairgrounds and stuff like
Oh,
that?
no, that's a little different, okay? So you do have to have your space, okay? But, we'll issue temporary permits to like maybe multiple vendors who are all using like in some kind of event that's going on, maybe a street fair or something. Yeah. I'm just talking about licenses at that point. You had a question there?
Yeah, so also going on the other businesses, like if you, let's say you did some sort of collab with coffee, and the coffee maker came in, and so launch it, are they allowed to sell their coffee in, as part of that event, or something like that, or does the law exclude any type of sale?
You mean at your brewery or at some event someplace else?
No, like release for the tap, if you're releasing this,
They couldn't sell their coffee, but you could buy it from them and sell it. Right? It's your business. Somebody else can't do business there, but you can have your business. I think there was one.
do have a question.
Okay.
So as far as the temporary permit, I've seen it different ways. My specific case, farm and micro, it's a new license, it's a new location, pre-existing. I just submitted it, I should expect maybe after 6 months, realistically, before it comes back. Whatever it is, the temporary license I can file for both farm, micro, permit.
Right, you would have to file one for each.
Okay.
Yes,
But there is one for something, that's why.
right. Yeah, I know you've been, have your hand up a couple of times.
You actually answered my question, 2 questions.
Well, I'm pretty good. Okay. Yes, sir.
With regard
Well,
to,
he told me not to get called on it.
with regard to the temporary production, is there any forecast or provision in terms of how long that review, once you submit the application, you have your full application, then you apply or ask for the temporary permit? Is there any vision in terms of how much time that will be for that?
No, because we had to, actually, I had to meet with Sharif and the chairman about this, because most applications go to the lockbox, and then, which is the bank in Philadelphia, and then they get processed, a check gets deposited, and then the application comes to us. So that process by itself takes a little while, all right? So we'll have to discuss how we're going to be, if they're going to go there, if they're going to come to the authority. But, so I don't want to, promise anything, but I can tell you right now, the temporary permits for retailers, the turnaround time is about 3 weeks, tops.
And they're going through the same process.
Yeah.
So maybe a month, maybe.
Yes.
Maybe, so at some point in the future, okay.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, when, is there a forecast as to when that discussion will finalize?
Well, the permit becomes available on the 21st, all right? I still have to mark up an application for it, because we had to change the existing one. That's on my to-do list for today and tomorrow, but, so we should be getting some guidance out shortly to everybody about what's going to happen.
I had a question about, just while we're talking about operating people in the meeting, kind of, I'm not sure if this would be directed to you necessarily, but that all of our labels expire on the same date every 3 years.
Yes.
So even if we file the very first day, we need to go back to I file all 100 of those day one.
You're not supposed to sell any alcoholic beverage, at least liquor and beer, until you have the brand label.
They all expire on the same day, so obviously we all put in for that. There's no way that you can 400 breweries and wineries, plus wineries and distilleries, we're all submitting these brand labels within a day, so there's, obviously that time to work, all of us are not compliant.
Well, I'm not following why you would wait till the last day.
You're not able to submit for the following year until, I think there's a 2-week period before.
Right, that's, so you don't wait till the last day. You're,
No, I
you're doing it
understand
at the 2-week period though.
Yeah,
Oh.
I do have a 2-week period, but I mean, I have ones that I filed months ago that are still.
So brand labels is under licensing, so I've got it now. And I'm still getting a handle on the, while I know a lot of the big issues about brand labels, as far as going into the weeds as far as processing those, I need, Sarah Ash, who's our charge of our brand labels, is a great resource. I'll be meeting with her to get a better handle on how we're doing things. And a lot of what we do is subject to, that renewal date is in the law. That's just what it is, all right?
That's not something that, I mean, maybe hopefully eventually could that be like a rolling 3-year recess or whatever it is, rather than everybody's expiring on the same date every 2 years.
That's something that would have to be done legislatively. Now, one of the things we did do a couple of years ago was move to the online system to kind of make things
Are you
faster.
using the online system? It's still taking months?
Isn't there a presumption that after a couple of weeks it's approved?
Yes. That's in the law.
Yeah, if you,
I
if
don't
you,
know what the number of days exactly is, but that's in the law. I don't know what's the law
it's,
say?
no, it's, 30 days? I think it's, I'd have to look. No, but there is, it's always been in the law. It used to be before the online system, that if you submitted it properly, which was what, certified mail, overnight delivery, if you did it that way, and the time went by, then it's deemed approved. We would follow up an event, and give you the paperwork, but it's deemed approved. Right? So, what the staff is doing is, they're looking mostly at new applications, for new products, and flagging issues. That takes up, so if you've submitted it, all right, and that time has gone by, and we can follow up later, but to see what's going on with yours then.
But if it's an existing product, you can assume it's going to be approved, and once the days run.
Yeah, have you ever made any changes,
Yeah.
And we, yeah. Okay.
5 minutes.
A question in regards to events and festivals. So sometimes in a municipality or like a village town, they would like to have an event where the local winery, the local brewery, the local distillery, and 2 or 3 other vendors, they all have their little stands within that stretch, let's say, of pedestrian zone or so. And we said, like, well, temporary license, you gotta map it all out, you gotta say, hey, here, access points, this, that, and that's our license. What's the right way to do an event like this? If you wanna have multiple people, and have they be, for example, would they have to be consumed right in your particular area, or can you
So
license the area?
it's going to depend on the event and how it's set up, how it's supervised, what you're doing. If you're just going to be using your craft manufacturing permit to do tastings and bottle sales, or if you're doing on premises, you're selling drinks to go. So it depends on a bunch of things. What I would suggest is that if a municipality has a plan for something like that, they can contact us and we can kind of work through how they can do it and what permits would be needed. We do that all the time.
They had a little plan like a Christmas market, and then they do a big summer festival.
Right.
And then at the end, someone does a pop-up, hey, I'm serving mulled wine in the restaurant, and then people are walking with that mulled wine
Right.
around, and you're like, well, I don't want to risk a license issue.
I mean, we have events like that all over the state, but each one may be licensed or permitted a little differently depending on what licensees are involved and who's conducting it. Is it a municipality? Is it a not-for-profit? Is it just the licensees doing it themselves? It depends on a lot of things. Anybody who didn't ask a question yet? Yes, sir.
I've got a random question. In regards to...
I'll give you a random answer.
Yeah, not really beer related, more hard seltzer related. Obviously, you guys have been very good about, allowing us to innovate and giving us a lot of freedom to do a lot of fun things. The way I understand it, at least when you're online and applying for legal approval for, say, hard seltzer, you require this in Ohio, through the EPA. I'm just wondering if we shed some light on what
So there were language about that being put into the last time we revised the brand label advisory. Actually, Sharif wants to talk with myself and my brand label people about some of those things and what chemists we're allowing, what chemical analysis we're allowing and whatnot. So we may be revisiting that whole situation shortly. Well, there are other products that, like, for example, I think wine products, because they have certain ingredients you can only put in a wine product. So we do it for that as well. All right.
Yeah, I think we're at time. So thank you so much again.